The courtroom was eerily quiet as Madison sat there, her long fingers gripping the pen between her hands. She didn't need to look at her ex-husband, Derek, to feel his presence. The room felt charged with the same tension that had been building between them for years. She stared ahead, her gaze cold and unwavering, her mind replaying the moments that led to this day, this battle. Madison wasn't just fighting for the assets, the house, or the investments. No, this was something deeper. This was a fight for her dignity, for the life she had given up for a man who had betrayed her. 5 years ago, Derek had been the center of her world. She had been the one who stayed up late, working long hours to support his career, putting her own dreams aside to help him build his empire. He had promised her everything: love, security, a family. But promises meant nothing when they were broken. The silence was broken by the judge, an older man with graying hair and glasses perched on the tip of his nose. "Are we ready to proceed?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with a hint of weariness. Madison didn't flinch. She nodded, though her heart was racing in her chest. She had been through countless meetings with her lawyer, but this moment, this final moment, was different. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for. Her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria, cleared her throat before standing. "Yes, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed." Madison's eyes flicked across the room to Derek. He was sitting there looking tired, the lines on his face deeper than they had been years ago. The man she had once adored now seemed like a stranger to her. He wasn't the man who had promised her the world. He was a man who had walked out on their marriage without a second thought. A man who had found comfort in someone else while she had been left to pick up the pieces. She gritted her teeth. The bitterness in her chest threatened to overtake her, but she had learned to control it. She had to stay strong. For herself. For what she had left. The lawyer flipped through the papers in front of her. "Your Honor, as we have discussed, the division of assets is the main issue at hand today. My client, Ms. Madison, is requesting fair distribution of the property, including the house, investments, and joint assets accumulated during the marriage." Derek shifted in his seat. He wasn't even looking at Madison now. His eyes were fixed on the table, his jaw clenched tight. She could feel the familiar ache in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She couldn't. Not now. Not here. The judge looked over the papers, nodding slowly. "It seems we have a few disagreements about the valuation of the assets. I suggest we move forward with mediation to try and settle this before we proceed further." Madison's heart pounded. Mediation. The very word made her skin crawl. They had tried mediation years ago, before the divorce papers were even signed. It hadn't worked. It wouldn't work now. Derek wasn't interested in compromise. He was interested in winning, in taking as much as he could from her. "I'm not here for mediation," Madison spoke suddenly, her voice firm and cutting through the air like a blade. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with the judge's. "I want what's mine, Your Honor. No more, no less. I want my fair share of what we built together." The courtroom went silent again, but Madison's gaze didn't waver. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had spent too long being afraid of what Derek might do or say, but not today. Today she was in control. Derek finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Madison, let's not do this here," he said, his voice low but with an edge of frustration. "We can settle this quietly. We don't need to make this a public spectacle." Madison's lips curled into a tight smile. "Oh, Derek, I've been quiet for far too long. It's your turn to listen now." She turned back to the judge, her expression serious. "I want what I deserve. It's the least you could do after everything." The judge glanced between them, nodding slowly. He could see the tension between them, the years of unresolved anger and hurt bubbling to the surface. "Very well," he said, signaling the beginning of what was sure to be a long and contentious process. As the proceedings continued, Madison couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led to this point. She had given Derek everything. Her time, her energy, her love. She had sacrificed so much of herself for him, and yet here she was, fighting for what should have always been hers. But Derek had made his choice, and now it was her turn to make hers. The cold, sterile walls of the courtroom felt like a cage, closing in on Madison with every word spoken. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Madison's eyes remained fixed on Derek, the man she had once loved, the man who had shattered her world 5 years ago, leaving her to pick up the broken pieces of her life. Now they were here in this sterile room fighting over what was left. Her hands were clenched so tightly around the pen in her lap that her knuckles were turning white. She could hear Derek's voice in the background, but it barely registered. All she could think about was the day everything changed, the day her marriage crumbled before her eyes. The memory felt fresh, like it had happened just yesterday. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Madison had been sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through paperwork, when Derek came into the room, his face drawn tight with an expression she hadn't seen in years. She had looked up from her work, expecting a casual conversation about his day or their plans for the weekend. But instead, she was met with the words that would haunt her forever. "I think it's time we talk," Derek had said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Madison had felt a chill run down her spine. Her stomach twisted in knots as she set the papers aside. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep the concern out of her voice. He hesitated, his eyes flicking away from hers for just a moment before meeting her gaze again. I don't think I can do this anymore, Madison. I met someone else. I want a divorce." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, the air in the room suddenly feeling thick and suffocating. She had stared at him in disbelief, her mind struggling to process what he had just said. "Derek, what do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a knot tightening in her throat. "You can't be serious." But he was. He was as serious as the day he had walked down the aisle, promising to love her until death did them part. Only now it seemed those promises meant nothing. "I'm sorry, Madison," he had said, his voice lacking any real remorse. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I found someone else. And I need to move on." Madison had been frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. She had put everything into their marriage, everything. And now here he was, walking away as if it had all been a waste. She had always supported him, his dreams, his career. She had sacrificed her own aspirations to help him build his life. And this was how it ended? "But we were happy, Derek. At least I thought we were," Madison had said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. "How could you do this?" "I never meant to hurt you," Derek had repeated, though his eyes seemed to lack any real understanding of the depth of her pain. "But it's over now. We can't go back." And just like that, Madison's world shattered. The man she had trusted, the man she had given everything to, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. There was no apology, no closure. Just a cold, indifferent statement that their marriage was over. Now, sitting in this courtroom 5 years later, Madison could still feel the sting of those words. She had tried to move on, to build a life without him. But it was hard. Harder than she ever could have imagined. Every day felt like a battle. Every day she had to remind herself that she was stronger than she realized. Her lawyer was speaking now, but Madison was lost in thought, drifting back to the painful memories of the past. She had never imagined it would be like this. She had never imagined she would be the one left behind. She had always seen herself as the supportive wife, the one who stood by her man through thick and thin. But now she was the one who had to fight for what was rightfully hers. "Miss Madison?" Maria's voice cut through her thoughts. "Are you all right?" Madison blinked, shaking herself out of the daze. "Yes," she said quietly, nodding. "I'm fine." Her lawyer gave her a sympathetic look but didn't press the matter. "We're going to move forward now. Let's continue with the division of assets." Madison nodded, her throat tight. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about material things. It was about reclaiming the pieces of her life that Derek had taken. He had stolen her trust, her belief in love, and now he was trying to take even more. But Madison wasn't going to let that happen. Not anymore. The conversation turned to the house. The one place that had once been a home. A sanctuary for them both. Now it was just a reminder of what she had lost. Derek wanted it. He wanted everything they had built together. But Madison wasn't willing to give up without a fight. The house had been her dream too. It had been her vision of the life they would have. A place where they would grow old together. But Derek had already moved on. He had found someone else, and now he wanted what was left of their shared life. "I'm not giving up the house, Derek," Madison said firmly, her voice steady, betraying none of the pain that threatened to overwhelm her. "I've worked too hard for it." Derek's face tightened, and for the first time since they entered the courtroom, he looked at her directly. His eyes were cold, calculating, and for a moment Madison saw the man she had once loved, the man who had promised her the world, only to take it all away. "Madison, you're not being reasonable," he said, his voice low but insistent. "We both know I'm entitled to more than you're offering." "No," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "You're entitled to nothing. Not anymore." The judge looked at them both, sensing the rising tension. "It seems we have a stalemate," he said, though his tone was more resigned than anything else. "I suggest we take a short recess before we proceed further." Madison's hands trembled as she stood, her eyes never leaving Derek's. There was so much anger inside her. Anger at what he had done, at how he had treated her. But there was also something else. Something more powerful. She was no longer the woman who had let him walk all over her. She was a woman who had fought her way back from the brink of destruction, and she wasn't about to lose again. The recess didn't last long, but it was enough for Madison to gather her thoughts, to center herself. She stepped outside the courtroom, leaning against the cold marble wall, trying to steady her breath. It had been years since she had thought about that day, since the day Derek had walked out on her. But now, with him sitting just a few feet away, all those memories came rushing back. She could still remember how her heart had ached when he left, how she had fought to keep their marriage intact, how she had begged him not to go, even when she knew deep down that it was already over. She had loved him with everything she had, but he hadn't seen it. And now, 5 years later, he was sitting across from her, acting as if he was the one wronged. She had let him break her once. She wouldn't let him do it again. Madison shook her head, taking a deep breath. "Get a grip, Madison," she whispered to herself. She could feel the tears welling up, but she blinked them away. This wasn't about the past. It wasn't about the lies he had told, the betrayal he had caused. This was about her future. She wasn't going to let him take any more from her. As she returned to the courtroom, she was surprised to find that Derek wasn't looking at her. His head was down, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. For a moment she wondered if he was having second thoughts, if he regretted how things had turned out. But that thought was quickly dismissed. Derek had never been one to show remorse. He had always been the one to walk away when things got difficult. Madison sat back down, her posture straight, her eyes cold. She could feel his gaze on her now, but she refused to acknowledge it. She wasn't here to please him. She wasn't here to beg him for mercy. She was here to get what she deserved. Maria stood up, her voice breaking the silence. "Your Honor, we are prepared to continue with the division of assets. As we discussed earlier, the primary issue is the house. Ms. Madison has lived there for the past 5 years, maintaining it, paying for the upkeep, and ensuring that it remains a home. She is entitled to remain in the house, and we request that it be awarded to her." Derek's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "That's not fair," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I was a part of building that home too. I want it." Madison looked at him, her expression unchanging. "You left, Derek. You walked away from everything. You can't just come back and claim it now." He leaned forward, his voice low but venomous. "You don't get to dictate what's fair. I have just as much right to that house as you do." Madison's jaw tightened. She could feel the anger bubbling up, but she held it back. She wasn't going to let him bait her. Not now. The judge, sensing the rising tension, raised his hand. "Let's all take a step back here," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "We're here to settle this matter, not escalate it. I suggest we approach this in a more rational manner." Madison glanced at her lawyer, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. She had done everything by the book. She had stayed strong, kept her composure, and now she was ready to do what was necessary. She was done being pushed around by Derek. She had already lost so much, but not this. The judge turned to Derek. "Mr. Thomas, if you're claiming ownership of the property, you need to present a solid case. What exactly is your position here?" Derek hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the question. He shifted in his seat before speaking. "I've invested money into the house over the years, Your Honor. I've contributed to the mortgage and I've put money into renovations. I deserve something for that." Madison couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Really?" she muttered under her breath, but it was loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "You really think that justifies your claim? You left me with all of it, Derek. I was the one who made sure the bills got paid, who took care of everything while you were out living your life without a care in the world." Derek's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, the judge held up a hand. "We're not here to rehash past grievances," he said firmly. "We need to focus on what's equitable. Now, Ms. Madison, you've been living in the house for 5 years, and I take it that you've maintained it without issue." Madison nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I've been the one keeping it up, paying for repairs, and making sure everything is in order." "And you, Mr. Thomas?" the judge asked. Derek hesitated. I haven't been involved in the upkeep for the past few years," he admitted, though his voice was reluctant. "But I still have a right to it." Madison could feel her pulse quicken as the judge considered both of their arguments. She had never been one to back down, not even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Derek might have walked away from their marriage, but Madison had never given up on the house. She had poured herself into it, made it her sanctuary after everything had fallen apart. And now she wasn't going to let him take that from her. The judge took a moment to deliberate, his fingers steepled as he thought. Then he spoke, his voice breaking the silence. "Given the circumstances and the fact that Ms. Madison has been the one maintaining the property for the last 5 years, I find in her favor. The house will remain with her, as it has become her primary residence." Madison felt a rush of relief wash over her, but she didn't let it show. She had won this round, but the battle wasn't over. Derek wasn't the type to give up easily. He was already glaring at her, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with something darker than just frustration. But Madison didn't care. She had made it this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. The final part of the battle was upon them. Madison sat in the courtroom, her gaze steady, her heart pounding as the judge's decision loomed. She had fought for so long, weathered so many storms. This was her moment to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Not just the house or the assets, but her dignity, her sense of self. Derek had taken so much from her, but she wasn't going to let him have the last word. The judge glanced at both of them, his expression neutral. "We've reached a decision on the property, but there are still financial matters to address. We need to move forward with the division of joint assets." Madison's hand tightened around her pen, her mind already racing through the numbers, the investments, the accounts. Derek might have walked out on their marriage, but he hadn't walked away from the things they had built together. Those assets weren't just his, they were hers too. She had put in the work, the late nights, the sacrifices. Now it was time for him to realize that. Maria, her lawyer, stood first. "Your Honor, as we've discussed, Ms. Madison is requesting an equal share of all assets. Derek, on the other hand, seems to believe that he is entitled to more, despite his absence during the past 5 years. We feel that an equal split is the most fair and reasonable outcome." Derek's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Derek didn't flinch. He had expected this. He always thought he could win. But things had changed. Madison had changed. She had become stronger than he ever realized. "I don't need to remind you, Your Honor," Derek's lawyer spoke up, his voice calm but trying to sound persuasive, "that Derek has continued to invest in their joint business ventures, and his contributions have been substantial. He deserves a larger share of the assets." Madison's eyes narrowed. She had spent years putting up with Derek's arrogance, his sense of entitlement. But she was done. This was her moment. She wasn't the same woman who had stood by him while he made decisions that only benefited him. She had worked just as hard, if not harder, and now it was time for him to realize that. Her voice, calm and controlled, rang out in the courtroom. "It's clear, Derek, that you've never considered the effort I put into this marriage. I didn't just stand by you. I carried us. I took care of everything, your businesses, our finances, the home. And you've got the nerve to sit here and say you deserve more." Derek shifted in his chair, the familiar arrogance creeping back into his voice. "You think you did it all alone, Madison? You think I didn't work for what we have? I built this too." Madison's heart thundered in her chest. She wanted to scream at him, to remind him of all the things he had taken from her. But she was done with the fighting, done with the anger. Her resolve was as unshakable as it had ever been. She turned her gaze to the judge, steady and unwavering. "Your Honor, I've given more than enough. What I'm asking for is what's mine. The assets, the businesses, the life we built together. I've worked hard, sacrificed more than he could ever understand. Now it's time to make it right." The judge nodded, his gaze shifting between them. He knew this wasn't a simple case. This was about more than money. This was about fairness, about the years of resentment, the quiet betrayal, and the emotional toll it had taken on both parties. After a long moment of silence, he finally spoke. "I find in favor of Miss Madison. She is entitled to an equal share of the joint assets, as well as the value of the business ventures in which both parties contributed. The division will be equitable, with each party receiving their fair share." Madison felt her heart skip a beat. It was over. The battle had been long, but she had won. It wasn't just a victory in the legal sense, it was a personal victory. She had fought for herself, for the woman she had become, and now she was free. Derek sat there silent. His face was a mixture of disbelief and frustration, but there was no anger this time. No more empty threats. This time it was over. As the courtroom emptied, Madison stood, gathering her things. She didn't look back at Derek. She had nothing more to say to him. She had spent too much of her life trying to please him, trying to hold on to something that was never meant to be. Now she was done. Madison walked out of the courthouse with her head held high. She didn't need Derek anymore. She didn't need anyone telling her who she was or what she was worth. She knew now. She was strong. She was capable. And most importantly, she was free. A few months later, Madison sat in her new office, a space that was all her own. The walls were still bare, but it was hers. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where she was in control, where she could make her own decisions, follow her own path. She was building something for herself, something she could be proud of. And as she looked out the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she realized something. The journey wasn't just about the assets or the house. It was about reclaiming her life. It was about learning to stand on her own 2 feet, to never let anyone, especially a man, define her worth. Her phone buzzed. A message from a friend. "How's everything going?" Madison smiled, typing her reply with a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in years. "It's going great. I'm doing just fine on my own." The message sent, and as Madison set her phone down, she knew that this was only the beginning. The lesson was clear. Never give everything to someone who isn't willing to give the same in return. Always remember that you are enough, and your worth is not defined by anyone but you.